I'm delighted to welcome today to the podcast Christopher Sigmond, who is a philosophical advisor. Never interviewed a philosophical advisor, and I'm almost feeling out of my depth here, Christopher. Very, very clever man. So welcome, and I'm going to hand over immediately to you to explain what is a philosophical advisor.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for that kind introduction. So a philosophical advisor, I'm working as a philosopher in the traditional sense, like in the ancient Greece, when philosophers were covering all kinds of subjects. Today, philosophy tends to narrow in on certain subjects. And I do have a degree in philosophy, and I've studied these things, but I also have a very broad background. So I have an engineering degree, a law degree, I've studied music, I've studied languages. And so I'm bringing this holistic approach to life and to business, and that's why I'm calling it a philosophical advisor. So you could think of, for example, Alexander the Great. He had a personal philosopher, which was Aristotle, and they would probably cover all kinds of topics. So it's a very broad way of saying that we can talk about almost anything, and then we go deep and see what the exploration leads to.
Amazing. And you just said law, engineering, and philosophical. So do you have three degrees? 4,
actually, yeah, and one in technology as well. And
Good.
then I studied music for 3 years. So I've been studying a lot, yes.
Okay, are you currently studying, or is that it now? I can't imagine there's any more that you can tap into your brain, goodness me.
Well, at the moment, I'm not studying at the academy or like the university. I might very well take some more courses, but at the moment, I'm studying on my own. Mm.
Excellent. So from what you were saying about Aristotle and Alexander the Great, it's almost like a critical friend, I guess, so that, you know, shoot the breeze, talk about different topics, go deep, go wide, whatever. So is that kind of a very crude summary of what a philosophical friend is?
Yeah, I like that term, philosophical friend. I tend to think of it as someone with whom you can talk about anything and who is honest with you. And then the friend part is really important, because after all, a friend is someone you would expect to be there for you and who's also honest with you, even if they think that you're wrong and they dare to disagree. So rather than to have a sycophant who only just says yes, yes, yes to everything, it's someone who would challenge you, to inspire you to think new ways, and where you can really discover things you didn't know beforehand. And that's what I find with my clients when I'm having meetings as a personal philosopher, that typically the conversations that we have start in one place. Maybe the client has a problem or something they want to discuss, and then after an hour or so we discover that, well, actually what we want to talk about is something completely different, and then we start diving into that. And I see this time and time again, because somehow the mind has this, it has many levels, and the surface level, we are only aware of certain things, but once we give it time and relax into it, then we can really start to find and address the things that really matter.
We're all human, aren't we? And we have this natural reaction, the emotional reaction to anything works quicker than our mind does. So in the snap second, sometimes people say things, do things which on the surface are irrational, but it's because it's the emotional stuff that comes out first before you think, shouldn't have said that, or maybe that didn't come out quite right, whatever. So what type of problems do people come to you with? Because it's another, I've never heard of a philosopher in the way that how you kind of deal with life and with clients. So what kind of people come to you? What kind of problems do you help them to solve?
That's a great question. So I would categorize it in 2 different categories. So either it's personal issues, or it could be organizational issues. So if we start with the personal ones, it could be existential questions. Maybe someone is having a life crisis. Maybe someone who has reached success and has basically made their goals, made the money, become famous, and then it's like, well, what is life really about? maybe all the money in the world isn't going to tell me what happiness really is and who I am. So it could be, that could be a starting point. There is an existential crisis. It could also be that someone who's already on the inner journey and who has done a lot of leadership trainings and has had a coach and has already worked a lot with themselves, but they now feel ready to embark on a deeper journey to really like get into things. And when it sort of shifts from the doing to the being. So because so much in the world is focused around doing things, and the way that education system is structured and the reward system in society, it's a lot about if you do good, then you will get the boon, which is typically money or recognition. Whereas what I'm emphasizing is the being part, being present, and to really, because that's where life really happens, here and now. It's not something that will happen later, as we sort of led to believe at times. And then the other category would be with organizations. And so there are a few different entry points. So, for example, I worked with a university here in Lund in Sweden, great university. And then the entry point was around leadership. And so we started working with leadership and relations, but it can also be around communication or collaboration, cooperation, and it can also be around structures. So there are different entry points. And what I typically do when I meet the client, regardless of the category, is that I listen a lot. So I call myself the listening philosopher. So I'm not really giving the answers. I'm more listening, because I believe that every one of us have so much wisdom and knowledge, which we might not be able to access. So it's like Socrates, Plato's teacher, he was seeing himself as a wisdom midwife. So someone who will help people to realize what they already know. So I'm mirroring people to understand what they really are after. So it's a lot about listening, and then things show themselves as we go along.
Interesting. I like that term, wisdom midwife. So that was Plato.
Yeah, it was Socrates who was Plato's teacher.
Socrates, right? Plato's teacher. Got that the wrong way around. Okay, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the Socratic method. It's even called Socratic method. It's all about asking questions. It's all about, not. I mean, in some of the dialogues, the questions are a bit long, to be honest. But in essence, the idea is that by asking the right questions, then the person will access what they already know.
How do you know what the right questions are? Because it is absolutely vital. I often have this conversation with people that if whatever the question is, you'll get X is the answer. But if the question is inappropriate, then you're never going to get to the point of finding what the crux of the matter is. So how does that work? I mean, is there a method? You mentioned the Socratic method. Is there a process where people can perhaps get to their own questions? Because as you're alluding to, the answers are inside us. We've all got the answers, but we need a philosophical friend like you to help to listen to our inner thoughts, our inner feelings, and whatever. So how do we get outside what's inside?
That's a great question. I would say that in many situations in society, in the education system especially, a lot of questions are framed in a way that there is a right answer and that there is a wrong answer. And we're trained to find the right answer and to tick the right box, or to answer the right year that this king was born or died or whatever. But a more philosophically inquisitive method is based more around curiosity, not like I want you to answer the right thing, but rather a genuine interest, a genuine curiosity, and listening not to hear if it's the right or wrong answer, but have an open listening, to ask open-ended questions. Like why? Any question that would start with one of the question words, why, what, how, where, when, those lead towards an opening. So it's more focused on the process of what happens when the question is asked than the answer itself. If it were possible to give definitive answers to all the philosophical questions, then it would have already been done a long time ago. But that's not the point. The point is that what happens when we ask the questions, because that's fresh, that's crispy, and then we can dive into like, okay, this is actually happening here and now. We're asking questions, and the questions change, or I mean, the answers change too. And that's one of the things. It's not static; it's dynamic, and many things influence that, including our emotional state, our physical state, what's going on in our heads, and in our lives, in our relations. So many things influence. If we really pay attention, then the questions will open up interesting things. And another thing, so curiosity is one thing, and presence, but then also to really follow. I work a lot with my intuition, so I trust the process, and it's not so much, and there can be doubts in this as well, but it's a lot about trusting that which wants to be said will be said. And after doing this for quite some time, I'm trusting that process.
Intuition is incredible. The times I say that to people, and my intuition has guided me into hot water, but also some amazing situations, including saving my life when there was no rhyme nor reason. I had breast cancer in 2009. Then again in 2011, I just felt something was not right. No rhyme, no reason, no pain, no lumps, no nothing. And I said to my team, medical team at the time, can you just check things out? And there was a grade 3 tumor in the site of surgery that I'd previously had 2 years before. And my intuition, I've always thanked my intuition. So how would you describe intuition? To me, it's a kind of an inner knowing something, but not necessarily being able to explain the thing. What's your take on that?
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that experience that you had. And I think one of the things you mentioned here is that the body has so much wisdom. The body knows. For example, our heart, it's beating all the time, but we rarely pay attention to it, but it's there beating all the time. And if we really pay attention, we can actually feel it and hear it. But even when we don't, it's there. The same with the breathing. It's going on constantly, night and day, from the moment we're born until the moment we die. And if we don't pay attention to it, it still works. But if we do fine tune and start really listening to what's going on, we can feel so much sensations. And then another part is the emotional life. We are having emotions all the time. And there's something about this, tendency to overuse the mind as the tool to answer everything. The mind is great for certain tasks, but it's like a hammer. You don't want to use a hammer for every task at hand, because for some tasks it's just devastating to use the hammer. And so for example, and so it's similar with the mind. If you use the mind for the right things and then leave it when it's out of its domain, then you can start accessing things. But the mind doesn't really like that. The mind likes to think that, oh, I know everything, I can solve every problem. And the mind, so it's about disciplining and acknowledging that we are so much more. We do have a body, and the body has a wisdom. We do have emotions, and the emotions tell us something. The emotions aren't just random, erratic things happening as a byproduct. They contain something. And so by paying attention to that, we start accessing far greater realms of knowledge. And intuition, the way I see it, it's kind of like knowing something without knowing how I know it, and then trusting it anyway. And I think it's a tool, and the more we practice it and the more we trust it, the more we get access to it. And you can start nice and easy, like with small things. It can just be, which road should I take today when I walk to my where I'm going, or things like that, and to start paying attention, to what feels good. Do I want to cross the road here or here? What feels better? Oh, well, my gut tells me this is better. Okay, so that's one type of direct knowledge, gut instinct. Another is to listen to the heart, which is much more in the emotional realm. And the intuition, really, the way I use it mostly is connected to vision. So it's like the higher mind. The way that the mind works, it has this amazing capacity to solve problems, but then it also has a higher circuit, which is more about receiving knowledge. And so, you know, it's there. The possibility is there. The potential is there. And then by fine tuning and practicing, it can open up. And then the fourth area, which is also closely connected to this, is to pay attention to synchronicities. Like you suddenly run into someone you haven't seen for a while, or things happen seemingly at random, and then it's like, wow, this was an interesting coincidence. Okay, pay attention. If coincidences are happening, that's an invitation to pay attention.
Absolutely, it's amazing knowing without knowing why you know. It happens all the time to me. I've got lots of examples, and I hear that with my clients as well. You just know something is wrong. You just know something is right, and go with it. And the number of times that I hear people say, "Oh, if only I'd listened to my intuition, X, Y, Z could have happened." But I'm also a great believer that everything happens for a reason. And you know, it's almost like we have this. You mentioned higher mind, so the guidance that we're given from our higher intelligence is absolutely amazing. The emotional intelligence stuff I think is fascinating. I first came across this through the work of Daniel Goleman at Harvard University in the early 90s. And that's something that's intrigued me ever since. And with the work that I do with this behavioral profiling, everything is all connected. And if you know yourself and you know how you differ to other people, that can help in huge amounts with communication piece, never mind, you know, anything else, relationships and so on. So how did you get into this work, Christopher? Because it wasn't an easy, you didn't kind of just jump in, did 4 degrees and off you go. So you've done a lot of work yourself, haven't you? Talk us through that.
Yeah, I have. I grew up with a very intellectual and creative father, and so I got a lot of stimulation in those areas. Whereas emotionally, it was there wasn't much talk of emotions when I was young. It was just left to its own accord, and so for me, it was a quite long way to come to emotional maturity, which I'm still learning about emotions, and it's an ongoing thing. And for me, I was actually depressed when I was 15, from 15 and onwards for 5 years, and then again had another bout of that for about 15 years. So that was a quite intense journey. And I think a large part of depression in my case was that I didn't feel that there was any room for me and for my emotions, especially. There's just less and less room, not talking about emotions and not acknowledging them. And then it's just like, what's going on here? So I worked a lot through that in many different ways, through therapy and different kinds of modalities. For the last 4.5 years, I've been dancing a lot, which is really, really helpful. Free form dancing, moving the body. I'm really into something called 5 rhythms, which is a way to structure that. I also work with dance myself. I facilitate dance and bring my clients in to work with the body. So it's been a long journey, and I think that emotional maturity and emotional intelligence is going to be even more important going forward. I mean, the concept has been around for a while, but now I think we're at the point where it's not a question of if we bring that in. It's not a nice to have anymore. It's a need to have. And people who want to live fulfilling lives and successful lives and really thrive, need to pay attention to their emotions, and we need to talk about emotions. And it's communication, and it's not only communication with each other, it's also communication with ourselves, and to have compassion with self, compassion with others, but first compassion with self. And so what you said, your example with people saying that, oh, if only I had listened to my intuition, I think that's a very natural reaction. But in that situation, I would say it's really good to also have compassion with myself. Well, if I had the capacity, I would have, but for some reason, I wasn't there, and there was fear. Fear is such a prevalent feeling, emotion for so many of us. It's everywhere, and we very rarely talk about it. When I grew up, I was scared a lot, but we never talked about that. And in fact, it was the opposite. Like, I was trained to, be brave, don't be scared, and things like that, which doesn't really help, because that just pushes the emotion down. So real courage, I think, is actually feeling the emotion fear, and then making an informed choice. Do I want to do this, or don't I want to do this? And not to be controlled by the fear. My strategy for a very long time was that whenever I was scared of something, I just do it. I just push myself through. And on a surface level, that seems like a very good strategy. It seems like I'm quite introvert, so I train myself to be extrovert, because that's what society rewards. So I train myself to be courageous, but something is lost by doing that, because in a sense, our emotions are telling us something really important. And so by receiving the message, oh, there is fear here, let's be compassionate with that, and then make an informed choice. So, not just to instinctively do it or don't do it just because you're scared, because either way, you tend to lose your way. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more that if you're scared of something, you might want to explore it. Maybe it's something that you want to do, but then again, maybe it's not. If you're scared of falling off a very high bridge, then probably falling off the high bridge isn't the way to go. It's natural to be scared in certain situations. So, yeah.
Interesting, the fear thing, because that comes up in my work with clients, helping them to reverse serious illness and disease. Fear is the thing that the medical people put in. In fact, I've had a phone call this morning with the tech that we have now. It's amazing. We can speak to people in many countries. I'm in Portugal now. You're in Sweden. Just that demonstrates anyway. But the fear that is put into us by people who themselves have only got one way of training. So I often come across this, medical people say, oh, you've only got X amount to live, and so on, which is what happened to me in 2015. I was given less than a year to live with stage 4 cancer. So now I have a duty to show people how to get through that, how to deal with it, and so on. So we all have a reason, a purpose, and so on. And I'm a great believer that things are presented to us in order that we can learn as individuals, but then also that we can help other people, as with your situation as well, going through the depressions and so on, and coming out the other end. But the fear thing is a really big one. But also we need fear, we need stress, we need all of this stuff, but in the right proportions. And I think it's when the proportions get out of whack, and then we become overwhelmed, and then we think there's no option, and then we've got more fear all around us. We're not going in, the inner peace, the inner being, the being present, I think is so important. And forgiveness, as you alluded to. My clients who may be eating the right things, having the right lifestyle, on paper everything is perfect, but if they haven't dealt with their inner self, they haven't dealt with their emotions, they're not going to heal fully. And I've seen it again and again and again, because of the fear, because of the emotions they hold in. It might be anger, it could be grief, it could be any kind of emotion. So I guess you must see this a lot with your clients, and I presume from what you're saying that you help them to talk through this scenario.
Yeah, I yes and no. I mean, what I'm offering is it's not really therapy. So if it's really like if it's really about addressing let's say depression or something else, then maybe it's more therapist you would go to for that. But what I'm offering is a way to include emotions and to make it not so foreign to us. And exactly these three emotions that we mentioned here, fear and anger and grief, I mean, those are three emotions which usually get a bad rep, and we try to avoid them at all costs. And some of them are even taboo in certain societies. But there is so much. What happens if we don't acknowledge them is that they stay. If we don't acknowledge something, it stays. But if we do acknowledge it and feel it, then things can really start to change. And that requires courage. That requires, quite a lot of courage to be with that. And so I'm gently encouraging people to share about emotions. And in some cases that can be a very big shift in itself. Just to talk about emotions for a few moments might be just a completely new thing, but it's very much needed, very, very healthy.
Absolutely. Forgiveness, I think, is a big thing. You mentioned earlier on that, maybe actions that were taken, we all take the actions we take at the time because we think that's the right thing to be doing, whether it's we feel it's the right thing or we think it's the right thing to do. And then sometimes we may have regrets and look back, oh, I wish this, I wish that. But again, forgiveness in those situations as well is really important, isn't it? Because otherwise these things niggle at you and they keep with you all the time. And then sometimes things seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Almost like our mind is over dramatizing things, but actually life is simple, isn't it? If we just let it be. That famous song. I was going to ask you about music. I see on the wall behind you, you've got a rather fancy guitar hanging up. You've mentioned dance influencing your life, but do you actually play or actively take part in any other type of music?
Yeah, I do play a lot. I'm a musician, so I play piano and drums and guitar and bass and all kinds of different instruments, and I write a lot of music. And I've made, over the years, I've made a lot of music. Nowadays, I primarily play what I call intuitive music, which is improvised music based on what's present in the moment. And sometimes I play for dance, so I facilitate dance while playing live instruments. And sometimes I play only music to inspire people to go within and to go on inner journeys through the music. So it's very much an explorative approach. And I also bring in music when I work with clients and dance in order to come into contact with emotions. Music and emotions are closely linked. In fact, I wrote my philosophy thesis on music and emotions. So that's an area which I find very rewarding. And it has something of a universal appeal, because dance and music, it's the same everywhere. I have this experience of going to dance workshops and dancing with someone for several days, and then at the end, not talking to people, but just dancing together. And then at the end, we realize, we're from different countries, and we didn't even know who we were or anything. But we've been communicating so a lot through the body, and it's the same with music. Playing music together with others, or just playing music with others, it's a fantastic way to communicate, and it's so direct. It doesn't have this confusion of the mind, which sometimes gets in the way. And the mind is fantastic. I love, thinking and talking as well, but it's also really nice to have other ways to communicate and interact.
The frequency music that we're hearing a lot of now has been used in healing, which I'm sure in the 528 frequency and vibration that gives us, and so on. I mean, in days gone by, that's one of the reasons why people would go to church, wasn't it? Have a good old sing song. You've got the vibration of the music through the organ, the acoustics with the domes, and etc., etc. And it's a feel good thing. Music can help you feel good, but also it can have the opposite effect if it's music that doesn't kind of sing to your soul. So you can uplift or come down in any which way with music, can't you? It's fascinating.
Yeah, we tend to use music or in like a lot of situations for when people get married, or when there is a funeral, or when we have a party, or it's like when we want to heighten something. And I was just thinking that the other week I was at my daughter was finishing school, so it was the end of year ceremony, and then of course there was music. It was primarily it was just music. Every grade were singing a song or a few songs, and then I was thinking that, well, it's interesting because in school the tendency is to prioritize the theoretical subjects. But when it comes to the end of the year, what they showcase, it's not theoretical subjects at all. It's the music.
Mm.
So music is very important to us as humans, and it's so clear. I mean, people are listening to music all the time. So yeah, there is a lot. There is a lot in that. And what I'm doing is to bring that into the other work as well. So it's a holistic approach where we don't just go for the mind, but to use the mind, but also use the emotions. And music is a wonderful way to access that.
Absolutely. My last husband is a bass player, 6-string fretless bass player.
All right.
Absolutely amazing. And he's now studied to be a teacher in that. So his gifts will be going throughout the world. So cool. Yeah, I take my hat off to any live music. I think it's fabulous. So Christopher, how do people get hold of you?
Well, I have a website, siriussounds.com. That's SIRIUS, then SOUNDS.com. So it's Sirius like the star, and then sounds. And I'm also on LinkedIn with my full name, Christopher Sigmond with an O. And I'm happy to engage. And I have also on Facebook page and Twitter, but I primarily it's easiest to find me on my website or on LinkedIn, I would say.
Fabulous. It's been wonderful speaking with you this morning, Christopher. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing more stories and seeing you on the networking circuit, as we've bumped into each other many times before.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elaine, for having me. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.